what I just wanted to discuss with you as opposed to present in a PowerPoint, just to get you into today's framework. You're going to be seeing a lot of PowerPoints. I wanted to get into why having a plan, a business plan, is important for your financing. See, I'm a loan officer, and we're always asking questions. We ask a multitude of questions when someone comes to us for funding, whether it's annual operating, term expenses, farm ownership, any kind of funding. When you submit an application, I have a plethora of questions. So one question I want to pose to you to maybe hear your feedback is to know what you think is important for financing from a business plan. Does anyone know why a business plan might be important for your financing? Anyone at all? Please.
Well, you have to pay your loan back, so you kind of want to know how much you're going to be making.
Okay, right, there's that. So that would be, we would consider that capacity. I'm going to get into a little bit more discussion, but I still want to try and assimilate. So you're saying so we can pay the loan back, you know, as a borrower, which is right. We do look for that. I won't lie, we do look for that. Does anyone have any other ideas about why a plan would be important for financing? Okay, so right now I just have two quick thoughts. You touched upon something that has to do with capacity, which is debt servicing. So I'm going to just throw this word down. This is an important word if you want to take it down. Forgive my penmanship. And what is your name? Linda. Linda? Good to meet you, Linda. You mentioned something that in my mind strikes the character end of our 5 C's as lenders. So this is capacity. This is one. Okay, so we have capacity and character. Can anyone think of anything else that, you know, when you're taking a loan, in terms of your business plan, what might be important for the for the lender to review? That's another one, collateral. So what is collateral to you as the borrower? Right. Now, more specifically, tell me what collateral is. What can be collateral for a loan?
It's a real property.
Okay. So real estate, right? How about a tractor? A plow, a planter, depending on what your farm operation is. How many of you in here do fresh market produce, meaning fruit and vegetables that you sell? Anyone do nursery stock of any kind? Flowers? Okay. Dairy? Any farmers do livestock? What kind of livestock do you do?
It's not actually me, it's my sister, but she has lambs.
Lambs? Okay, great.
Plans for chickens.
Plans for chickens?
Right now.
What do you do? Grain? Okay, so you, and?
Grain.
Grain, okay, great. So we have kind of a nice mixture of farming in here. So another form of collateral, which is oftentimes overlooked, is the crop security. You took the words out of my mouth. So crops, and that's something that the Farm Service Agency is able to take as collateral. But when a lender goes through the review, they are looking at real estate, absolutely. That's usually the first form of security. It's the most secure. It can't leave. Tractors can drive away. Then your equipment, and then your crops. Here we are 3, and we have 2 more C's that are important as part of the lending, and elements that you want to start considering when you formulate your business plan. Are there any other thoughts? If I use the word condition, does that mean anything to you in terms of a loan and your business plan? The idea of what conditions you could adhere to as part of the actual contract for money? Does that register? Has anyone ever had conditions as part of their loan or as part of their financial plan? Have you ever set conditions for yourself, like this week I'm going to shoot for this amount, but I'm only going to be able to spend X amount? Or over the course of the next 6 months, I want to make sure I can reduce my expenses on labor, and kind of make that an informal condition that you try to adhere to as part of your business plan? Well, on the lending side, we have other conditions that we expect. Conditions can include seeking training. Annie's project is a fantastic example of training that you can find, take, and empower yourself to be more savvy as business owners, because we really look at you as business owners. Your discipline is farming, but first and foremost, we're looking at a business plan. So you have to understand that when we ask questions as a lender, we're really getting into what is your business plan? Put the agriculture aside, we understand that, but what is your plan and what conditions do you ask of yourself? And then we could ask conditions of you as part of the closing. For instance, if you're going to rent some land, one of the conditions would be that you present a lease that says, I have access to this 10 acres of property from the landowner, signed by the landowner and you. That would be a condition. Would that be fair to say? So other conditions could be right of access to water. For those of you, if you do grain, are you irrigating or not? I would imagine you're not irrigating. It would be very costly to irrigate grain, depending on how much you do, if you have pivot irrigation. But if you're doing fresh market produce, if you have livestock, you need access to water. You might not have it on the farm you have, so a condition could be you have a lease agreement for access to water, whether it's a well on the neighboring farm or a lake or a pond or something. So I'm going to put this one up, and we have one more. Okay, so we have capacity, character, collateral, conditions, crops. That is a C word, but that is not the C word I was looking for. Commitment is kind of married in there with character and conditions, but it does relate. These are all interrelated. Capacity, and it, okay, that one is up there. I'm sorry. I've gone out of order, but character, capacity, capital, conditions. Capital, okay. That's a good one. Capital. So capital has two meanings. It could mean cash. It can mean asset. So when we're looking at capital, and when you're looking at it, sometimes I write it with a K because it helps me remember that there's two forms of capital. You have actual fiat money, the money in our pockets that we use in exchange, as well as the assets we have. What kind of capital do you bring to the table? Working capital is money, but having access to a tractor, that's a form of capital. It's part of your capacity. All of these are interrelated. So when you're looking at your personal business plan, the question you have to ask yourself is, what am I bringing to the table when I'm trying to formulate a business plan? I think you had said something earlier about you don't want to have just a silly plan that, you know, who knows if you can achieve it. Well, if I ask you, well, in terms of capital, what are you putting into your operation? What have you personally invested in your farm operation? Are you able to answer me? Would you have an idea as to where you can start? I spent 10 years of my life building this farm. I've put in irrigation, a fence, we want to do organic. I have taken courses, I attend twilight meetings, I have a pesticide license. There's all of these aspects that are not defined simply with the cash in our pocket. Although the cash in your pocket in your bank account is helpful, and we can look at ratios. We have ratios for everything in the book, believe me. But when you're focusing on capital, we need to know, in addition to what you have in the bank, what your bottom line is, what your equity position is, well, what have you invested over time? And sometimes you don't think about that because it's here and now, and you don't realize, wow, over the past 5 years, I've actually put in $50,000 worth of money into my farm, which today looks like some fence, chicken coop wiring, you know, if you leveled some land, if the forest was encroaching a little bit and you cleared it back to maintain your property through a conservation plan. These are really the heart of your business plan, and these should be manifested in some way. And when you think about formulating your business plan, you want to have each of these, make a list and go down and see, what's my capacity? Capacity is income and expense. This has to do with how much are you going to earn over the course of the year or over the course of a month or a week, and how much is it going to cost you? What is your expense related to that income for the farm? This could include non-farm income as a supplement to offset debt servicing that's farm related. I think later on today you're going to get some other speakers, I think from Farm Credit, and they'll get into the nuts and bolts of a balance sheet and an income statement. So I don't want to get too far into that. But this would be a capacity issue. I'm going to skip character for now. Collateral's pretty straightforward. We touched upon it. What assets do you have? This would manifest on the balance sheet. Do you have real estate? Do you have a tractor? Do you have multiple tractors? Do you have a pump? Do you have a filter? Do you have fencing? You really want to list everything you have as collateral. Crops. Don't exclude crops. They're very important. The value of a crop right before harvest is the most it's ever going to be. And hopefully, weather permitting, you can harvest it, and that can be realized, and the proceeds can be used to pay back the debt. So that is a viable form of collateral. The conditions that you set upon yourself, that you have in your business plan. For instance, we have conditions. We'll say we need to have you have production and financial training if you don't already. If you've been through college and you focused on business or finance or economics, or you've managed a farm and you had to take this course because your supervisor said, oh, you have to take Annie's project. These are elements of conditions that you have demonstrated, and this actually relates to character quite a bit. I'm going to get to character at the very end. So the conditions that you set, the conditions that are set upon you by the lender might say, every check that comes in has to be jointly payable, or we want to have an installment from every single. Let's say you're a dairy operation and every month you're doing milk, and you have a milk check coming in. Well, we want 15% of that income every month. So that would be a condition of the loan, but you have to possibly consider that as part of your business plan, because that might make it more enticing to the lender to say, okay, well, they're telling me in advance, they're willing to give me some of their proceeds. That's a very good thing. That's very strong. Capital, again, is not only what you have in your pocket, but what you've invested. This gets into equity positions. If you're liquid, if you're solvent. Liquidity has to do with today, working capital. What you have to pay for, if there's a cash on delivery, shipment of seed, fertilizer, or if you have 30-day terms. As you get into your asset and debt long-term, real estate, mortgage, that's your solvency. Bankers look at the matching of the book with assets and liabilities to make sure that from current assets through intermediate, which would be a tractor, a car, into long-term, that there is a balance. That you don't have $1 million sitting in your account today, but no real estate. It would be a little bit strange. So this is something you want to keep in mind. Make sure that when you start looking at your balance sheet, you're keeping in mind all of your capital, equipment, assets of any type. Now, character is the most fluid of this, and it really synthesizes everything, and that kind of brings this all together and ties it up nicely. When I do loans, I look at a holistic applicant. I don't ask for a credit score and say, oh, yes or no, because it didn't hit this level. I don't do that. That's not what Congress authorizes me to do in my day-to-day, and I can't take that position. What I do is I look at the entire application. I'll look at a balance sheet. I'll look at every factor here. Capacity, what there is for collateral, what conditions that you have put on yourself voluntarily, what conditions that I think are reasonable for the loan, what capital you have, how self-invested you are. Am I having to give you 100% of financing? Or do you only need financing for labor? Because you currently don't have a lot of working capital at the beginning of the season, but you do need an installment to pay for upfront costs that will pay out later, months later. So these are all the aspects, and in a good business plan, I'm going to be able to identify what each of these are, and then it helps form the character. That's the holistic analysis. Okay. Well, I want to give you the opportunity. I want to hear from you. I can talk all day. I'd like to turn it over to you and see if you have any questions specific to this, specific to anything about a business plan. Any thoughts, any comments? Do you disagree with anything I have to say? Yes.
Very honestly and frankly speaking, I'm familiar with the lawsuit from black farmers.
Okay.
And as a black female, I'm concerned that, you think you can meet all these, and there just seems to be a glitch in the system. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, sure. I believe this is the Pigford lawsuit. There's several litigations that have gone on. African American, Native American. Currently, I'm going to mention before I close the Hispanic and women farmers claims, which is ending in March. And historically, the USDA, the Farm Service Agency, has had transgressions, and they were a very big problem. And I want you to trust that there are regulations and mechanisms in place now that allow us to look at every applicant the same. And there is nothing but what's on paper that we look at when we consider a loan. And that in no way does race, gender, sex have anything to do with the lending decisions that we make. So you should feel comfortable. And if you,
Because to be honest, in my sister's case, I tried to Google some information on that, and it was a nightmare to even find out how to file to see if you were eligible.
I can give you some.
I mean, that was after it was supposedly settled, and you still couldn't find out how to even put a claim in.
Sure, I can get you some information afterwards and direct you accordingly, and then get back to you with, I don't have all the information here, but I'm happy to chat afterwards and get you some websites and contact information. Does anyone have any other questions or concerns?
Talk about the Microloan Program that you have now.
Great, thank you for kickstarting that. USDA 35 days ago announced through Secretary Vilsack the Microloan Program. The Microloan Program is a 7-page application that qualifies you for up to $35,000 worth of credit. It's a very simple application. We relaxed the eligibility criteria that traditionally we would ask of a farmer, which had to do with 3 years of production experience, 3 years of financial information. Well, we understand that as the mantle is passing and there are niche markets, 2-3 acre farms that are sustaining themselves, and beginning farmers who want to get into that. Well, this application really suits that need. You don't have a tremendous history in agriculture, you're having difficulty finding credit from a conventional lender. Well, this is the opportunity here to apply for up to $35,000. And what that means is you can apply for annual expenses if you have to pay labor, if you have some seed, fuel, fertilizer, upfront expenses. Or if you need to buy, you have some farm space rented for $200 an acre, and I'm going to need some irrigation equipment, whether it's above ground aluminum pipe, some spigots, a pump, a filter. We can finance that equipment over 7 years. So it really gives us some flexibility to look at your application, and to quote Chris Bayerhelm, who works in FSA, we don't have to plow so deeply for information. So this application gives us that ability to make a judgment based on a more simple application and history.
What would be the advantages to going to your organization rather than a bank? And also, are the interest rates comparable?
Well, I represent the U.S. government, and the first thing I must say is that we don't compete with the private sector. So this gets to the interest rate question. Our interest rates right now for operating loans are relatively low, 1.125%. They change monthly, yes. Not too much, and it's fixed. So when you take a loan from us, we don't have any fluctuation whatsoever over the life of that loan. But a condition that we do have, number 4, is we want to see that you've honestly attempted to get credit from a conventional lender. See, our goal is to get the beginning farmer and the farmer who's experiencing some financial difficulty on their feet into conventional credit, so that you can be taken care of by any bank. Any bank can look at you reasonably and say, oh, you have a history, you service your debt, you have experience, you meet all of these different internal check boxes, and they would extend you a loan. So we're a middle ground here, and we also work in the form of guarantees. Now, all of what I'm discussing is in the books that I gave to you all, except the microloans, because that's too new. That book came out a few months ago. Microloans came out in January.
So are you saying that we need to go to a commercial bank first?
Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
None of the conditions, I hear these stories about limitations on production sometimes and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Are those ever some of the conditions that
No.
come out of these loans, or that's some
No,
other kind of-
that's a separate,
Okay.
I would never condition the production levels. One thing we would get into as part of our analysis is if you say you can, okay, you do grain, right? Let's say you tell me you can harvest 75 bushels to the acre of soy. I'm going to say, wow, what beans are you using? Prove that to me. That's a tall order. So what would be reasonable? Don't overinflate your numbers for the sake of getting a loan, because if the lending officer extends you the loan, it's under the idea that that amount of that yield is going to come and you're going to receive a price for that yield. That might overinflate your income, and it might falsely lead you and the lender to believe that you can debt service at that level. So you want to be honest and you want to be reasonable. But we would never step in and say, oh, you can or cannot produce this because of, soy doesn't grow over there. But if you have a plan that's reasonable, that you can prove, we go with what you present to us, and we discuss that as part of the application. How can you grow 100 head of cattle, or how can you raise beef cattle on 2 acres of space? Please explain that to me. And I think that's a reasonable request from a lender's perspective. Does that answer the question?
So with the crop, would you have to present a history of the production on that particular piece of land?
Well, that's one of the great elements of the microloan is that that can be supplemental information, but it won't be required. The more information we have, the more educated we are, and the better loan we can make, and the better assistance we can be to you. We don't want to put you in a position as a government agency that lends taxpayers' dollars where you're compromised or we're compromised because of a bad decision. So that's all. This is all something that is discussed in the back and forth of a loan application. So, any other questions? I think we're towards the end, right? Yeah.